Hey everybody, it's Ellen Lewis from Crazy for You, and I am so excited tonight to share with you all about Itto yarn and holding multiple strands of this yarn together. So if you've ever seen Itto around, these funny little Japanese put-ups and wondered what the heck, tonight we're going to talk about it because if you read in my newsletter, I don't know how many of you follow me in the newsletter or read my blog. If you don't, there's a link in the description. You can totally sign up for that. I talked about the whole Ito thing, and I kind of wanted to get into it tonight. And I wanted to share with you some swatches that I've done, and some projects, and just some thoughts that I have about this. So if you are familiar with Itto, if you've worked with it in the past, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Let me know what you've made, if you've seen it, what you thought, what your colors are, and all that kind of stuff. So the reason I go live is because it's interactive, and I love that. So keeping an eye on the chat, and if you have something to say or something you want to know, please put it in there. And I love seeing you. Thank you. So let me say hi to everybody. Hey, Amelia and Maria and Barbara and Jana, nice to see you. So yeah, so this is good. Hey, Mary, talked about this a little bit in, like I said, in the blog this week. Um, this is a little bit of an intimidating yarn, I think. Um, I started talking a little bit about Habu textiles in the newsletter. I didn't really want to kind of go into that, but I do remember seeing their booth at TNNA, probably 2005, 2006. And it was all very stark, and they had these unusual fibers, and you were supposed to hold them together. And I was like, okay, I don't really get this. And, the woman there in the booth, she was trying to be really nice, but she's like, if you don't get it, it's probably not for you. And I'm like, okay, it's really not for me. So I'm just backing away slowly. Um, and I think it took a little while for me even to come to Ito. There was after Habu, and Habu is still around. It's a beautiful yarn, and their stuff is really unusual. Um, but kind of after Habu, there was Shibui. And most of you who've been with me a long time know that I carried Shibui for a long time, and I really liked their stuff. But that was sort of the first company that was promoting this concept of very, very fine yarn and carrying it together in multiple strands and all of that. And it was lovely. And I loved Shelley Anderson, who was a wonderful designer. And she was sort of the person who realized the design vision that the owner, Darcy, had for Shibui. And sadly, kind of Shibui went its own way. I don't really know all of the background on that. But I will say that for me, I own a yarn store. So there are pretty much no limit to what I could make for myself in a sweater, right? But if I look at a sweater and what it's going to cost to make, and you're starting to look in the, $400, $500, $600 range for a sweater, and that's for my size, not for somebody, who's making a much larger size, I'm going to pay a little bit at that, right? You guys know what I'm talking about. So the thing with Shibui is that they were putting their yarn up in 25-gram hanks, and they were charging a lot for it. And it just got to be kind of cost prohibitive. And I kind of left a bad taste in my mouth, even though I still love their designs and I still love Shelley. And I really still love their yarns. So long story short, a few years ago, I want to say 2021. Yes, 2021, I was at H&H, which was kind of the first effort for them to bring this huge European trade show for the yarn industry to the United States. And Darren had this whole big vision of all of these vendors. And anyway, long story short, saw Ito yarns there. And again, their booth was very sort of small, but I saw Sandy Barnes there. And Sandy Barnes had been kind of my go-to girl at Shibui. And she was the one who did all the swatching and all this. And she was like, oh my gosh, Ellen, so nice to see you. Because I bought a lot from Shibui. So we were friends. And she said, yes, I'm with Itto now, and you're going to love it. So um, I wasn't sure, but I'll tell you who was there was Cecilia Campochiaro, who I have long adored. She wrote Sequence Knitting and has since written a bunch of other books. She was like, yes, Ellen, this is a wonderful yarn. You need to get it. You need to do this. And the yarn that she showed me was Kenu. So here is Kenu. I have two different colors of Kenu here with me tonight. And it's this gorgeous way fine yarn. Can you see how fine that is? This is a lace weight. I mean, very, very fine. This is so skinny. This is not a kind of yarn I normally would knit with. So I was like, this is really fine. I don't knit this kind of stuff. She goes, no, you're going to hold it together with itself. And she was making this beautiful gradient scarf. Cecilia had just come out with this book called something about morals, and it was holding like two different colors together. So she showed me how she had worked these where you do two strands of one color and then one strand of one and the next, and you keep moving it through so you make this beautiful slow shift in colors. A lot of you have done the color play scarf, which was a church mouse pattern in Kid Silk Case. So if you have, you know what I'm talking about. Tell me in the chat if you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so I picked out a bunch of colors to make these scarves, and it just never happened. It just never did. And that yarn just sort of, I felt like, oh my gosh, this was a big mistake on my part. So then the next year, I don't know, doesn't matter. But here's what happened this year is I went to H&H in Cologne, Germany, and that's the big trade show for all of the European market. And so instead of having a really small little booth, Itto had this huge booth with all of these samples. And as it turned out, I had met a woman who was a designer for Itto. She's also a yarn rep for Rowan, so that's how I actually met her, was in the Rowan booth. And she had done all these beautiful designs for Itto. And we started talking, and she was really selling it because, you know, she's a yarn rep and I'm the kind of customer, you know, she sells to yarn stores. And so we went down and we started looking at all of the things that she'd made, and the sweaters in that booth that she had done were so interesting and so exciting. And when I say interesting, I don't mean weird. I mean really beautiful and different from a lot of things that I had seen. And she was holding multiple yarns together. So I got really excited about it. Whitney was with me that day, and we tried on all the samples. And like I said, because it was a big booth, we had plenty of time to sort of just play there. And I told her my sad, sad story about the Kenu that she had sold me a while before. And she said, oh, Ellen, that's so sad. What are we going to do? And she showed me several projects that she'd done. And she had this big book of swatches. So she had like all of their, I don't know, 36 yarns swatched with all the other 36 yarns. Anyway, and I couldn't believe how fabulous it was. And I said, when I grow up, I want to have swatches like that in my store. So that's what I have been sort of doing the last couple days, is really sort of playing with and swatching these different yarns together, because it's amazing how it works, right? I have talked on and off about why we're doing all of these holding two yarns together. So if you have been with me, you know that I didn't get it. I didn't understand why you would use two strands of yarn to get a gauge of 22 stitches over 4 inches when you could use one DK weight yarn. And it was Cecilia Campochiaro who explained to me that when you have two fine yarns or three fine yarns, they each maintain their own independent drape. So you have more drape when in the fabric when you are using 3 finer yarns than you would if you had one single yarn of the same gauge. And I didn't get it, and she gave me this visual that I have shared with you before, about a bundle of copper wires. You know, if you have all of these skinny copper wires, you can get a wire that's maybe not as big as your pinky, but you know what I'm talking about, like a quarter to a half inch um, in diameter. And you can bend that. You know, it's very flexible, very malleable. Whereas if you had one single copper, piece of copper that was a quarter to a half inch in diameter, you couldn't bend it because its radius of curvature is too large. But each of the individual wires keep their own fine radius of curvature, which is what you have when you have something that's very fine. So bottom line is that 2 or 3 fine strands of yarn give you a fabric that has a great deal more drape than than a fiber made of a single yarn at an equivalent gauge. So tell me if that makes sense. Tell me in the chat. Hey, Jana, let's see. Hey, Terry. Hey, Marcia. Nice to see you. Ooh, Jana said, I did that scarf. Yes, it was very pretty, right? Kids okay. Yeah. Okay. So there are a bunch of Itto yarns, and I have not yet ordered all of them. And I say not yet because I absolutely plan to, because they're all so beautiful and they all have their own kind of different little thing. So let's get into what I have here to share with you tonight and what they look like kind of knitted up together in different pieces. So a lot of you are already doing the loba top, which is Kenu and So Asa. So Kenu is that one that I showed you that's very, very fine. And it is a raw silk. So it has a great deal of texture to it. So you can see that, it has this sort of tweedy effect. And that is because it's made from a different kind of silk than the silk that you see, that's a mulberry silk. I'm not exactly sure. Maybe somebody knows a little bit more about this. I think it has to do with the way that the cocoon is pulled and all of that. So that is worked with this, which is So Asa, which is a cotton linen silk blend. Also very, very fine, right? But when you hold them together, so these two together give you this fabric, this gorgeous kind of marled fabric. Now, I talk a lot about when you carry 2 yarns together, if you have 2 that are the same gauge, a lot of times one of the stitches will sit behind the other, and you don't actually get a full marl. You get sort of a splotchy effect. And that is true to the larger the yarn, the greater that effect. But here in these lace weight yarns, you really don't see that quite so much. You see more of a consistent sort of side by side of those strands. And this is at a gauge of 20 stitches over 4 inches. So you can't imagine that these 2 lace weight yarns could be knit at that gauge, but they absolutely can. And they're just really wonderful. So this is a summer weight yarn, obviously, like I said, with the cotton, the linen, and the silk together, and worked with this silk. It's something that you can wear all year round. So I love that. But there is also another yarn, very similar, called So Kosho. And this is not quite as fine. Let me show you what this one looks like. So this is more of, say, a fingering weight. Let me show you the difference between the So Asa and the So Kosho. So you can see that the So Asa is very, very fine, and the So Kosho is, well, after you've been working with this lace weight, it feels almost chunky. But it's a fingering weight yarn. And when you carry that with the, where is that piece? Yes, when you carry that with the So Asa, you get yet another effect. Where is that? Okay, so that, oh my gosh, did I do that one? I know I did. I have all of these different ones. I didn't do that, but you do get a different kind of effect. But it's very similar in look to this. Okay. Now, um, there's another yarn that's very cool. This is a paper yarn. So this is called Gima, and this is also very fine. And I'll tell you, when I saw this, I thought, oh my gosh, this is this tiny little thing that's going to need to be wound. And what a pain that's going to be, because I don't have a Swift that size. But when I opened it, it's already wound. So it's already this cute little cake, which I love. And you just pull from it. So it's already wound. Can I tell you how much I love that it's already wound? So this is Gima, and this is a paper, right? Like I said, again, very fine. This is a lace weight. It is the same, kind of the same gauge as the Soasa, right? So two lace weights. And I had wanted to kind of duplicate one of the yarns that I always loved from Shibui, which was twig. So it is very similar to the So Kosho plus the Gima. So those two together give you this fabric. So it looks a lot like the this one in the Lova, but it has a slightly different hand. And because it's paper, it's a little crunchy in the knitting, but once you block it, and these have all been blocked, once you block it, it's really, really gorgeous. Anyway, so I bought this, and I did actually bring in several colors of the Gima and several matching colors of the Kenu. So in particular, this and this for me, because that's my color, because I wanted um, to provide the yarn that was twig, right? I wanted to get that opportunity because there's a beautiful sweater that I love called Triton, and I knit it in the twig, and it's not available anymore. So I was very sad about that, and a lot of people have asked me about that. So if that is something that you're interested in, yeah, let me know, because this Gima plus the Kino is a perfect combination. Okay, the other thing that I wanted to share with you that I think is really fun is this. This is called Sensei, and this is same kind of put up as the Gima, only instead of it being paper, it is a silk mohair. It's put up in the same way, so it doesn't have to be wound, which I love. Again, I thought it was going to have to be wound, but it doesn't. Um, and I know you are familiar with Kid Silk Haze. This is finer than Kid Silk Haze. So I know Kid Silk Haze is very fine, but this is even finer. Um, when you look at just as a measure, Kid Silk Haze has 232 yards per 25 grams, and this has 330 yards per 100 grams or 25 grams. So it's probably 40% finer. And the impact that it has on the yarn that you carry with is much, much less. So this is the one that I ended up swatching a whole bunch. So Kenu is kind of their biggest yarn. They have it in the largest color palette next to Sensei. And these two together, so the Kenu and the Sensei, make just a lovely, lovely fabric. And you can see this tiny bit of tweed sort of showing through, but this is a really delicate fabric. This is my new favorite because it does have this subtle tweed, but the mohair doesn't take over. It's a lot. I mean, it's finer, so it has less of an impact to it. But that's really very pretty. And I also swatched. What is this one? This one is So Asa, which is your cotton linen silk, swatched with the Sensai. And that's this. Again, very delicate fabric. I did all of these swatches on a 5 or a 6. So really light, a lace weight plus a fine lace weight on a 5, and this is going to give you about 23 stitches if you're doing it on a 5. It's a fabric that you can see through if you hold it up, but I think as worn, you're not going to get arrested if you wear this. But this is honestly just a beautiful, this would make, if you're more of a shawl knitter, this is one of the most gorgeous options out there, I think. The Kenu is so lovely and light, and then this is lovely and light, but it doesn't feel, it doesn't feel woolly or, overly fluffy. If you look at it from this direction, you can't see really a halo coming up from it as much as you would with, say, a Kids Hill case. And don't get me wrong, I love Kids Hill case too, but it's just different. And then I swatched, this is the So Kosho, which gives you a much plushier fabric, right? And I did this on a 6. So this is a gorgeous, this is a very wintry fabric because your So Kosho is fingering weight, but it's a wool and cashmere blend. So really beautiful and plushy and lovely. So like I said, I did not swatch the So Kosho together with the Kenu, and I probably need to do that. But the effect is going to be very much like this. Think of the Kenu plus the So Kosho kind of as a winter version of what we are doing for the, for the Lova, right? Yeah. So let me know what your thoughts are on Itto. Have you used it? Have you heard of it? Does it make you curious? Eventually, what I want to have is kind of a little booklet of all the swatches at kind of different gauges, because I did these, as I said, on a 5 or a 6 because I sort of thought that would give me a sweater kind of fabric, but you could definitely do it more tightly or more loosely. I don't know if this camera is going to give me a better angle. So there's that. Yeah, and this is actually my swatch for my Lova, which is really very nice. This is the So Kosho with the Sensei. This is the Kenu. I believe this is the Kenu with the Sensei. No, this is the So Asa with the Sensei. So this is sort of a summery version of that combo. And this is sort of the wintry, more plushy version. And then this is the Kenu with the Sensei. So you can absolutely make your own fabric. This is the paper, the Gima with the Kenu. And this, one of the reasons I like this whole concept of the swatches is you could use the Gima interchangeably, with either of these yarns. If you wanted to do something that, just had a different color or whatever, if the Sawasa didn't come in your color, you can absolutely swap out this fun Gima. Let's talk a minute about what paper yarn is. When we think about paper, we're thinking about, wood pulp and things like, notebook paper and whatever, and how fragile that is, and how when it gets wet, it falls apart. Are we thinking about, cheap tissue or whatever, Kleenex? But paper is a manner of constructing a fabric rather than what it's made of. So, um, backstory on this is my mom was a printing and engraving consultant back when I was growing up, and she sold cranes, wedding invitation, and stationery um, in Washington, D.C. She was a manufacturer's rep. And she knew a lot about paper, and she talked to me about it. And she goes, honey, your money is made of paper, but it's not made of just paper. It's made of linen rag. And that's the same paper that the Crane's invitations. I'm sure you've all heard of Crane's invitations and Crane's stationery, right? Um, it's all made of the same thing. So the process of making paper is working the material down to a pulp and then spreading it out on this like a screen and drying it. So the paper can be made of wood pulp, it can be made of linen rags, it can be made of, a variety of things. But the paper that goes into here is definitely cotton. It's probably a cotton rag, but you could do it out of linen. So we had a yarn in the store from Noro that was a linen paper, which is the same kind of thing. Linen waste or linen rags worked down to a pulp and made into a paper. So I don't want you to think that paper yarn is something that's going to disintegrate like a tissue, because that's what I thought, honestly. And that was kind of interesting. Let's see. So yes, Jana Swatch it is a beautiful fabric. So the lova that she's talking about is this fabric together, and it makes just a beautiful a drapey fabric, but you can get the fabric that you want. If you want something that doesn't have a tweedy effect, you could use these two together, or you could use these two together, and you would completely eliminate this bit of silk that has that tweed and texture in it. So you can hold not only two different strands of yarn together, but you can hold two of the same yarn. So I could hold two strands of this, right, by itself, just two strands. And we had a number, I guess, two people, one of them was Lori Rayleigh, knit the lova with two strands of Kenu and two different colors of green, just ever so slightly different. And that was beautiful. You could do the same thing with the Gima. You could hold two strands of the same color. You could hold two strands of two different colors. The key is that you simply have to swatch it at the gauge that your project calls for and see how you feel about it, right? Because whatever the question, the answer is always going to be, you will have to swatch it and see. But bringing the different fibers in, a tiny bit of this, very fine lace weight with its little tweedy effect is going to give you a beautiful fabric, how it sort of shines through in that. You can see that little bit of tweed shines through in that and makes it really very, very lovely. And I know this is my favorite, but if mohair is not your thing, there are, at least half a dozen lace weight Ittos that you can use instead. And I know we have a lot of patterns out there, petite knits and Kadri and my favorite things. And a lot of your Scandinavian designers and coming more American designers really are using multiple strands. And people say, I can't do that because I can't wear mohair, or I can't wear alpaca. We have some very fine alpaca yarns that are kind of lace weight carry-alongs. And my word to you is you don't have to use a wool or a mohair or an alpaca. There are lots of fine lace weight yarns that you can add to another fiber to bulk it out a little bit, to give it that little subtle bit of color shift, or, just to make it a little more interesting. It doesn't have to be a mohair. It can be most anything you want. um, and like I said, these fine, fine yarns, you can either add them just for color and not change your gauge. For instance, if you were, um, let's say you were using this So Kosho and you were knitting it at a gauge of 20 stitches over 4 inches, you could add a strand of another lace weight yarn and knit it on the same needle size, and it's really not going to impact your gauge. It will make your fabric a little more firm, and it will give you a different effect, but it's not going to necessarily change your gauge. You and your needle are in control of your gauge. You can get pretty much whatever gauge you want by combining these fabrics and controlling the needle size. I have another video on that whole concept of gauge. But yeah, so I hope this is giving you kind of a little bit of a taste of what you can do with these very fine fibers and how the different fabrics look, when they're knit up. I would say, Kenu is not a wildly expensive yarn. This is 450 some yards, and I think it runs $17. And you can grab a couple, three skeins and just play with it. Maybe get two skeins of different colors, just real close, and just play with them and see how you like all of the different yarns together. I'll tell you, for me, pulling the sensei and the So Kosho and the Soasa and the Gima and the Kenu together and just swatching them, it was really fun. And I don't know, everything that you do when you're swatching it like this is kind of a little bit of a surprise. You never know exactly how it's going to look or exactly how it's going to feel. So one of the things that did surprise me was that this So Kosho that I did on a 6 with the sensei, I felt like, this is a beautiful a sweater yarn, but it could also be knit on a larger needle. This would be perfectly happy on a 7. And you could definitely get a worsted gauge, 20 stitches over 4 inches on that yarn. And the lova that a lot of us are doing, like I said, this is my swatch for it. It would have been perfectly happy on a finer needle. It's knit at 20 stitches, like I said, but you could absolutely knit that same fabric for a different project, say the poppy tea, and knit it on a 5 needle or a 4, whatever you need to get a gauge of 23 stitches over 4 inches. And the fabric would still be lovely and drapey because neither of the yarns, the So Asa or the Kenu, have a lot of inherent structure. They're both plant-based fibers, and so they're very drapey. So I encourage you to play with the Itto. If you are a little bit intimidated by it, as I was, just dip your toe in the water and get some. And, maybe join us for a knit along in one of the Itto projects that we're going to be doing. Probably be a Shelley Anderson pattern because I love her stuff so much. And just play. And if you don't want to go and buy Itto, if you already have some stuff at home, go through your stash and see if you have some lace weight yarns in there, or nothing really bigger than a fingering weight yarn, say, and just start playing with them. And not only playing with them in different combinations, but playing with them in different combinations on different sized needles, and see how you feel about the fabric. What I do when I make a little swatch is do you see how I've got those little pearl bumps there? At the bottom right of my swatch, I do 5 purl stitches if I'm on a 5, 6 purl stitches if I'm on a 6, so that when I come back in 6 weeks and say, "God, what size I love this fabric. What size needle did I use for that?" I have that information right there, and it doesn't have to be on a little tag that I know it's gonna fall off or get lost. So, anyway, my goal tonight was to share with you again about Itto and a little bit about how you can create the fabric that you want by mixing different fibers together. You don't have to wait for a yarn company to provide you with a yarn where the strands have been twirled and blended. You're the designer with that. And all you have to do is just get in there and play a little bit and have a good time. So I hope that you will do that. And until next week, I hope you keep knitting and create something beautiful. So good night.